Romans chapter 14, reading verses 7 through 13, and it reads, "For none of us liveth to himself, and no man dieth to himself. For whether we live unto the Lord, and whether we die unto the Lord. Whether we live therefore or die, we are the Lord's. For to this end Christ both died and rose and revived, that he might be Lord both of the dead and living. But why dost thou judge thy brother, or why dost thou set at naught thy brother? For we shall all stand before the judgment seat of Christ. For it is written, As I live, saith the Lord, every knee shall bow to me, and every tongue shall confess to God. So then every one of us shall give account of himself to God. Let us not therefore judge one another any more, but judge this rather, that no man put a stumbling block or an occasion to fall in his brother's way." Brother Lou, will you pray for our Sunday school class this morning? Amen. You may be seated. So we have been looking at Romans now for 79 weeks. In some ways, it feels much, much longer than that. The title for this particular lesson is also the question for us to consider is, why are you sitting there? Why are you sitting there? Now, as an aside, I want to know, I was warned this morning that our camera is zoomed in, so if you see me looking down, I'm making sure I'm not popping off camera. And to those who are watching the stream, sorry, I might disappear like this, and then I might come back like this. I just really wanted to do that, so. As we go through Romans 14, we have been examining our liberty and the source of liberty. And our source of liberty is the Lord Jesus Christ. It is receiving the infilling presence of his Spirit living within us, the Holy Ghost, Christ active in our lives. And this causes us to have his mind if we put him on a throne. There's a big if. We think receiving is the end of it. We think we've made it there. That's just the starting gun to start our race. And as he leads us into circumstances and situations that we must come to terms with who we are and who he really is, we have the opportunity to submit to him. And when we submit to him, we see how good it is for us. And that's when we start recognizing his goodness in our lives. And that's not to say he wasn't good before that. It's to say that sometimes we don't really, truly recognize how good he is. Oh, we might say he is good, and we say he is God, and we have the rhetoric that we use to comfort ourselves. But it's until we come face to face with those circumstances and situations that we can truly declare, I have seen him, and he has been good in my life. And that gives us the assurity to know that he will continue to be good in our life, and that his best interest for us is far better than any of our self-serving agendas could be. And his liberty is given to empower us to produce his fruit and to fulfill his purpose. And his purpose is he will be known and he will be justified and you will see him. But none of this is possible unless we have his mind. And it's not enough to say, I have it, but it includes coming into an alignment with him. So let me put it in the simplest terms I can, is seeing things the way he sees them and acting like he would have us act. When we look at our liberty, there's a couple warnings that we must heed unless we use our liberty as a means to be, well, our carnal debit card. Very easy to say, well, I have liberty, so this allows me to do whatever I want, whenever I want, however I want. I wish it weren't so, but it is. And we've been looking at this in chapter 14, and we've been looking at the eating of meat and the honoring of Sabbaths. And by Sabbath, it's not just a day of the week, but also special feast and day. And we must be careful to consider that the fulfillment of our flesh or filling of the belly or satisfying fleshly desires is not our goal. The problem with liberty is it goes beyond the immediate satiation of hunger or immediate, is we often take that liberty to put our brethren in bondage. And we talked that at a good deal last week about us taking our liberty and doing that. And the bondage is seen over an example of the Jewish Christians requiring obedience to the law by the Gentiles. And this included requiring circumcision, not offering meat to idols, requirements of special days, and the list goes on. But it was that you have to live by the law because that's what we were instructed in the first covenant. But, His grace is sufficient, but you have to do these things. And what they were basically doing is they were putting the shackles of the law on the Gentiles, saying, we can't live up to it, neither will you. And that might not have been the intent, but I can't help but think it was like Adam trying to get his fulfillment through the obedience of Eve. Is it possible that we as Christians want to put these burdens on others to get our own fulfillment? To justify our actions, to justify what we want it to be. And I will say what we believe, because belief is knowing and acting on it. And it's an inappropriate belief that we have because it's not known, it's a false knowing. We're believing a lie. In fact, all the principles can be summed up, and I know this is very familiar to us, but Deuteronomy 6, 4 through 7 is, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one Lord. I have to point out, what is the foundation of everything? From the time of the Old Testament, it doesn't end, but the foundation of everything we believe is here. And what are we hearing? The Lord our God is one Lord. Everything else that we come to know about him has to be built upon this foundation, or it is not appropriate. It is not a house we should be living in. And what do we do with this knowledge? Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thine heart and all thy soul and all thy might. And these words which I command thee this day shall be in thine heart, and thou shalt teach them diligently unto thy children, and thou shalt talk of them when thou sittest in thy house, and thou walkest by the way, and when thou liest down, and when thou risest up. We all want to focus about teaching them diligently to the children. But the simple fact is, all of verse 7 basically says is, I am God, and you will live because of who I am. Too often we want to focus on the teaching of our children, and I'm not saying that's inappropriate. We do need to teach our children, but it's not just by teaching them. It is by every single action that we do when we go out, when we walk, the way we communicate outside the home, but more importantly, how do we communicate inside the home? We don't need to be public Christians and then at home. What does that teach? And we wonder why we'll end up with a generation of whited sepulchres. Look how fancy I am, look how good I look at all the things I do, and we end up with being Pharisees. Instead of taking these words and making them motivations of the heart, they made them goalposts. The thing about goalposts is they can be moved. If I make it not a principle to live by, then I can now deviate close enough to it. I can make it like horseshoes. I still get a point if I'm, so far away. And the reality is there is no almost. You either know who he is and he guides your life, or you missed it. And you had a people who ended up taking the principles into an unfathomable amount of laws and regulations. And this is the bondage that we want to put on our brethren. Instead of teaching the principles and pointing to him, we want to layer law upon law upon law upon law. Because if I can say that I fulfill the law, I'm going to hold you up to my standard of what my Christianity is. I'm not going to make myself God. I'll just make myself like a demigod, right? I'm not in God's shoes. I'm just a level below because, how spiritual I am and stuff. The thing about those chains is they're both on the Gentile and the Jewish. They're on those who have been imposed by it, and they're on those who put them on. They're just too blind to see the chains that are on their own arms. One of the scariest things is a drowning person. They will grab anything to live. We had a circumstance at work. We were talking about various options, and they're like, there's no way this individual would choose this option. I said, they will. They're like, there's no possible way. It doesn't make any sense. I go, it's the only option that allows them to deviate from what is right and not confront themselves. They will pick it because a drowning man will grab whatever. They will grab a snake, even if the snake will bite them, in hopes that they'll live. And the sad reality was they grabbed that option, and it was dooming. We have to be careful to make sure that we are not the ones drowning in our own self-righteousness, grabbing onto others, pulling them down, and drowning them. And man, by creating those chains, attempt to fulfill themselves. Instead, like Adam trying to find fulfillment through the obedience of another, instead of coming to the fulfillment of their relationship with God. I don't know why this has been what we have been harping on for the past 3 or 4 weeks now. And I'm speaking to myself here, but because we have been, I think it's very important that we are paying attention to what God is trying to say to us, because this has been reoccurring over the past few weeks. I don't know who. I don't know if it's individual, but all of us right here, most importantly, we need to pay attention because it has been a common theme. And that's not tooting my horn. Not in the least. But because of mankind's involvement, we have instructions and warnings about our liberty. And lest we say we're the strong ones, the warnings and the instructions are foremost to us who consider ourselves strong. And I'm going to use the royal us because no one wants to consider themselves weak. Do we? Not at all. I don't want to admit I'm weak. Of course we're all strong. To that I'll say is work out your own salvation with fear and trembling. Because if you think you stand, beware that you're actually standing upon the rock. I think it is important to call to mind that our strength is our reliance upon him. It is his strength to do his work. The strong are told, pursue the relationship with the brother. And I just want to put as a note, this does not give us license to not pursue any relationship with anyone else of the body. Because, gray area, if he tells me to pursue the weaker brother, that means the strong brother who annoys me, I don't have to seek fellowship with him, right? I know that might not be everybody's first thought, but it's a thought that I'd have. As I read this, looking for ways to get out of it, if I consider everyone strong and I'm only supposed to pursue fellowship with the weak, then therefore I have a loophole to get away from the strong people that annoy me. You sure you're one of the strong ones? Yeah. And your job is not to argue about doubtful things. There are things that are required for fellowship in the body. There are things that are non-negotiable. And we talked about this morning is, hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one Lord. That is not negotiable. Who he is not negotiable. It is not to argue about those things we are told explicitly to avoid, such as Romans 1:24-32. Wherefore God also gave them up to uncleanness through the lust of their own hearts, to dishonor their own bodies between themselves, who changed the truth of God into a lie. And so this is where it's a warning that don't do these things, because if you don't have the truth, the foundation, you're going to twist the words of God and you're going to think that these things are acceptable. Worship and serve the creature more than the Creator, who is blessed forever. Amen. For this cause God gave them up to their vile affections, for even their women did change the natural use into that which is against nature, and likewise also the men, leaving the natural use of women, burn in their lust one toward another, men with men, working that which is unseemly, and receiving in themselves that recompense of their error, which was meat. And even as they did not like to retain God in their knowledge, God gave them over to a reprobate mind to do those things which are not convenient, being filled with all unrighteousness, fornication, wickedness, covetousness, maliciousness, full of envy, murder, debate, deceit, malignity, whisperers, backbiters, haters of God, despiteful, proud, boasters, inventors of evil things, disobedient to parents, without understanding, covenant breakers. Did you catch that last one? Without understanding. That was quite the list we went through. Murderers, backbiters, without understanding, covenant breakers. Whoa, 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 whoa. That's how serious it is about our understanding of who he is. Unless we think it's something we throw away, it is a foundation, it is fundamental. Look at the list that it's compared into. Now, I don't want to judge the weight of everybody's sin, because we get into this match of, oh, well, I sinned, or I sinned more, and God's grace is so much more for me. If you missed it, you missed it. But don't think not knowing him isn't very important. More than very important. Essential. Meaning, if you don't know him, you don't have it. Covenant breakers, without natural affection, I'm going to go implacable, unmerciful, who knowing the judgment of God, that they which commit such things are worthy of death, not only do the same, but have pleasure in them that do them. To argue that any of these things are appropriate is to abuse your liberty. To do those things is to abuse the grace of God. To do those things is to abuse his Spirit living inside of you. That's not to say that we don't mess up. But the minute we stop fighting these things, we have abused our liberty. And if we think that God will redeem me as we go running headlong into sin, we have missed it. We are without understanding. We have jumped off the cliff. And we need to turn to him and run, because that liberty has been abused. And I would say our conscience has been seared at that point that we no longer hear him if we think those things which are bad are right. Weak, you don't get to judge. You don't get to determine the standard that people live to. You don't get to govern the grace of God. That's what judging is we think we can step into God's position and govern what is right and what is wrong. Romans 14:4 is that we are looking at is, who art thou that judgest another man's servant? To his own master he standeth or falleth, yea, he shall be holden up, for God is able to make him stand. And then we looked, it says, both the weak and the strong are supposed to live and die unto the Lord. And then Paul, in his, I'm going to go flowery language, he says, if you regard the day, you do it for the Lord. And if you don't regard any day more than the other, but you regard them all the same, you do it for the Lord. And he that eats meat does it with thanks, and thanks the Lord. And he who abstains from that same meat does it to the Lord, and is thankful to abstain from it. Because all that we should do should be in him and for him. And it becomes the difference of a mind of a servant. Because the mind of a servant, everything that a servant does, all potential is owned by his master. And so the mind of a servant is, I have to do it because I owe it. The mind of an heir, that is the difference, is it comes to agreement with everything that has to be done because it furthers the kingdom. I do this because I am his, and I want to accomplish what he wants. And why is this? Is because Christ died and rose and lives. He lives now and forever. Death hath no more dominion over him. He has conquered death. It is his. And so the question that we get in Romans 14:10 is, why dost thou judge thy brother? This question's in a good spot. We just got beat a little bit about the mentality of those who want to judge each other. Unless we think we get off scot-free, the question now drives it home to any individual who is hearing this or reading this. It makes us come face to face with what we should understand from what was spoken before. Why do you assume to put yourself in the place of God? See, judging is not just the act of making pronouncement. It comes with the underlying mindset that you are the appropriate person to sit in the judge's chair. It's not just passing stuff. We think it's just saying things. But the reality, the heart of it is the mindset that says, I have the authority to determine what is right and what is wrong. And then condemn or free the brethren based on it. You know, you are given the power to become sons and daughters. It doesn't say you are given the power to become their parent or their overseer or their jailer or their judge. I can't help but think at this point is, let he who is without sin cast the first stone. So which one of you perfect brethren have the right to step into the judge's seat? I wouldn't recommend it today. Even with the judges that we have, they are granted authority by God to be in the position they are. I will not say I agree with them, but they are given authority. Now, if you go into that courtroom and you're going before the judge, I would not recommend you jump over the bench and sit in his seat. Things are not going to go well for you. And yet, spiritually, we think it's appropriate to run up to the judgment seat and jump into his seat and condemn the brethren. Well, Paul, I don't judge them. Maybe I think a little less of them. Well, just in case that's what you were thinking, let me follow it up with the next question. Or why dost thou set at naught thy brother? Similar to all the other occasions in Romans, there is a follow-up to combat man's immediate attempt to provide their own justification in this circumstance. Well, I'm not saying I'm the authority, so I'm not going to judge him. I'm just going to treat him as a stepbrother in Christ. We're spiritual enough not to judge because that's bad, so I'm not going to judge. I'm just going to treat them a little bit less. Perhaps we consider ourselves spiritual enough to even consider that we are commanded to pursue fellowship with even them. I can do that. I will hold back just enough love and attention that I can fulfill myself without sitting in God's seat. I know. Listen, it's fine, but perhaps I can justify myself to know that maybe they're a second cousin in the Lord. Third cousin twice removed. And that makes me wonder, what does it mean to be set at naught? It's the same word used in Luke 18:9-14, where it says, "And he spake this parable unto certain which trusted in themselves that they were righteous and despised others." That word despised is the word that's translated as set as naught. It says, 2 men went up into the temple to pray, the one a Pharisee and the other a publican. And the Pharisees, they separated themselves by their external rites and piety. They did so good to be noticed. They looked the part, and they were recognized for how well they kept the law. But the publican, tax collector. And we talked about tax collecting before, but let's put it this way. You had to subcontract a job. There's a certain quota you had to return to Rome, and then whatever margin you wanted to make, that was your margin. And you had the full force of the Roman Empire behind you to say, they're not paying me what I said they're going to pay me. Now, I have a problem where if I know my car's breaking down, I know I'm going to go to the shop, and they might be the greatest person on earth, but I'm just wondering, how are they going to do me wrong when they fix my car? We could say the publican worked for the IRS. The Pharisee stood and prayed thus with himself, God, I thank thee that I am not as other men are, extortioners, unjust, adulterers, or even as this publican. And I want to stop right there because that word despise is brought to life here in his thoughts. I thank thee, I am not as other men are. Now I want to stop for a second. What do we know about this publican here? Nothing other than he came to the temple to have contact with God. But even now, because we want to put into context what his job was, how many of us are like, oh, I was a tax collector. He probably deserved that kind of treatment, right? Very easy to do. If I worked for the IRS, I wouldn't tell anybody. But what if that publican only charged enough to live modestly and provide it back to Rome? What if everything that they did was in line and orderly and they didn't overcharge people? Do we even stop to consider that? I can tell you the Pharisee didn't. The Pharisee saw a tax man and said, oh, look at who they are. Thank God I'm not like them. Thank God I am a better form of human. I'm more evolved and dignified. Look at how righteous I am. What were they doing? They both went into the temple to pray, to have separate communication, have contact with God. Did they, though? The one who looked the part certainly didn't seem like he was coming to talk to God. He looked like he was going to brag to God in order to get a reward. Because he says, I fast twice in a week. I give tithes of all that I possess. Look what I have done to earn standing before God. And the publican, which we all have an immediate notion of. I'm not saying we all had the same what a scumbag thought that I have because he's a tax collector. But we all create a story. But what was he doing? He was standing afar off, and he would not lift up so much as his eyes unto heaven, but smote upon his breast, saying, God, be merciful to me, a sinner. And what was the focus? It was his relationship with God. I tell you, this man went down to the house justified rather than the other. For everyone that exalted himself shall be abased, and he that humbled himself shall be exalted. How often do we make assumptions about the brethren and their service to the Lord? And because of this, we place ourselves in a position of hierarchy. We say that we're better than them. We say we're more important. That same word set at naught, just Acts 4:11 says, this is the stone which was set at naught of you builders, which has become the head of the corner. Being set at naught, I think I'd rather be judged of people than set at naught. I would rather be told I am a terrible person than to pretend I don't exist. So why do we despise the brethren? Why do we put them at naught? And Paul's answer to those questions, which we should have got to, is, for we shall all stand before the judgment seat of Christ. It is his authority. And the two questions the reader comes into mind is, what gives you the authority to judge, and what gives you the authority to despise? The answer is, it's not. It's not given to you, it's his. The one who lives. It is his authority as creator and purchaser and redeemer. And the next two verses further build upon standing before his judgment seat. I think we have a triple confirmation at the beginning of Romans 14:11. For it is written, it has been recorded for all time, a confirmation. And it says, as I live, number 2. I have established it. Personally, I like it without the as, but that's me. Because it has been written by the one who lives. The same one who died and revived a few verses earlier. It is written by the one who conquered death and by whose authority can write this and demand it through all of creation. It is written, I live, saith the Lord. Third confirmation, he has spoken. I don't think you get a greater assurity of confirmation. Once, twice, 3 times. So what comes after is going to happen no matter what. We can rest assured that the following is there. Every knee shall bow to me. Every shall bow. There is no maybe. It is a 3 times definite. And bowing is kneeling before him in recognition of his sovereignty, his authority. Any parents have an argument this week with any of their children? Maybe about cleaning their room? Maybe after some hemming and hawing, they conceded to do the task, but the entire time they're... I personally was never like that as a child. Just don't ask my mom. Did I do it? Sure, but there was defiance in my heart the entire time. And just so no one thinks that kneeling is just going to be defiance, it also says, and every tongue shall confess to God. It is not just a symbolic bowing to his authority, but they will confess with their voice that he is God. In the Greek lexicon, confessing means to bring forth from their heart freely, publicly, and openly. It is not forced. When they recognize his authority and they come to realization who he is, there will be no argument, there will be no defiance, it'll be recognition. Not only is it that he is God, but who they are in relationship to him. And we think that we belong in the judgment seat. So then every one of us shall give account of himself. The sum of this is that everyone will stand before him and made bare. Second, you give a report of your actions, your responses, not the actions of anyone else. You worry about your standing before God. And that includes your responsibility to edify the body. One of the commentators, and I forget who it was because I didn't write it in my notes, said, God will honor those who didn't want relationship with him for all eternity. That really puts it in perspective, doesn't it? And the last verse of our main text says, let us not therefore judge one another any more. This was a problem. And Paul says it stops now. Understanding this, all is his, all power, all authority, including the judgment seat. Therefore, we do not belong in that judgment seat. We have no business judging the brethren. We have no business treating them as stepchildren. We have no authority to withhold his love from them. And the truth of the matter, that's what setting a knot is. That's what despising is withholding the love that they are due. And unless we think we're justified, there was that phrase, owe no man anything. If they are due love, you give them love. But judge this rather, all right, finally got something I can judge. I know you're looking at me crazy, but this is where we are. We're told not to do things, and we're saying, but judge this rather, that no man put a stumbling block or an occasion to fall in his brother's way. Your responsibility is the governing of your liberty to not use it as a stumbling block or as an opportunity to make the brethren fail. There's a but there. Did you notice that? But judge. So him being judge is good. Or sorry, us judging one another is bad. The good is our authority and liberty to make sure we are not a cause of stumbling. Because it's New England, we don't want to be a pothole to the brethren. Use the liberty to make sure that we are not a cause of stumbling, let alone falling. So the question that we have to consider is, do we put ourselves in his seat? And if we are, the question is, why are you sitting there? Brother Pulford, will you pray a closing for Sunday school?